Okay, so assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome to today's program. My name is Jasmin Nasser and I will be leading this program. And this is the first program and it's the start of a series or of a new project about Eritrea, seen from a historical perspective and focusing on our roots and our heritage. And the purpose of this program is to highlight and spread the awareness about Eritrea among us youth Eritrean, and especially us second generation diaspora children. So we have our first guest with us today, Zain Shokai. He's very experienced in the subject Eritrea overall, and he can actually present himself. So welcome, Dr. Zain Shokai.
Thank you, Yasmin, for presenting me. My name is Zain Omar or Zain Shokai, as normally use it. And I am an Eritrean citizen originally, living in Sweden since a long time, almost like 3 decades, 29 years now. And I was born in Eritrea in a town called Keren. We in Keren say it's the second town in Eritrea, but many Eritreans say no, it's the third because Massawa is the second. Anyway, we're not going to argue about that. Anyway, it's one of the biggest or one of the big towns or cities of Eritrea, Keren, in the center of central part of Eritrea. And I'm married, have 4 children, and I studied my first years of, like we call it here in Sweden, grundskolan, or elementary and junior secondary probably, some of the years of junior secondary in Eritrea, and then I moved to Syria and finished my secondary school in Syria, and then studied at Damascus University, English Language and Literature, graduate, BA, Bachelor of Arts from Damascus University, in language and literature. That's my background. And then came to Sweden, as I said, for almost like 30 years ago.
MashaAllah, that's great. So can you start just personally, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in Eritrea and about your background, Eritrean background.
Yeah. As I said, I was born in Eritrea, and I think I left Eritrea when I was 14 years or 15 years, almost 15 years. I left my home country and first came to Sudan, and after that time, after a short time, I mean 2-3 years in Sudan, then I proceeded to Syria. By that time, many of the young people were heading to the Middle East to study, to continue their studies. At least those, the Muslim young people were heading to the Middle East because of somehow mastering Arabic was one of the reasons in just to pursue their studies. And I studied in Syria, my secondary school, and then I had to spend a year, a national service year in Eritrea. By that time, when ELF was dominating the whole battlefield of Eritrea, and I went to Dankalia first, and then spent some months in Dankalia, and then we went to Barka, and also spent some few months in Barka and came back to Syria, and then I sat for the matriculation of 12th year examination, and then I started studying at the University of Damascus, as I said before. So this is how I came to Syria from Eritrea. But in Syria, we had a student movement, very strong one, student movement. We were a branch of a huge student movement that was called GWES, General Union of Eritrean Students.
So it was only like Eritrean students in your movement.
Exactly, and it was a huge movement. We had branches in both Middle East, Europe, and Sudan. And this movement was one of the first supporters of the ELF, and we I consider GWES, or General Union of Eritrean Students, as a political school where I first knew about my country, the history of my country, and the ethnic groups or linguistic groups in Eritrea. And all this, I acquainted with my own country outside the country because of this strong movement that we had by that time, and it was raising the awareness of its members hugely, and it was very effective and very supportive of the armed struggle that the Eritrean people had by that time. And most of our colleagues and friends were heading to the field after graduating, or even those who failed to finish their studies. They were heading to the field and being part of the struggle that was going on in Eritrea by the time of 70s and 80s. And many of the leaders of the ELF have this kind of background, who studied academic and military studies in many Middle East countries such as Egypt, Syria, and Iraq by that time.
So you felt the need that even if you weren't in the country, you were forced to organize yourself outside the country to develop Eritrea when the revolution was over.
Yes, definitely. And ELF was a very energetic organization, and the history of the ELF is totally ignored because of the regime that we had in Eritrea today. And actually, the history of Eritrea is the history of the ELF. And the ELF had played a major role in mobilizing the Eritrean people and achieving what we have achieved in Eritrea in 1991. Many of the people think that the EPLF has done this job, and the ELF was already thrown out of Eritrea in 1982. But the main military force of the Ethiopian army by the time of Haile Selassie, the ones who were trained by the Americans and the Israelis in the 60s, were defeated by the ELF already in the 70s, and particularly in the battles of from 1971 up to 1975. The ELF had a very confrontational war with the Ethiopian army, and those who were trained by these two powers, as I mentioned before, US and Israel, were defeated by the ELF already in 1975, 76, 77, and then we had a problem also within Eritrea, a fight between the different fractions, ELF and EPLF. And this fight started actually in 1970, and we call it in the Eritrean history as civil war. And it was actually, it shouldn't happen, and it was we feel ashamed as Eritreans of that part of our history. We're not very proud of it. But anyway, it happened, and it took place, and the fight took place among Eritreans, and a lot of blood was shed in that war by that time. And I think one of the historical obstacles for the Eritrean struggle that prolonged the time of the struggle from 1961 to 1991 was one of the reasons was this internal fight that we had among Eritreans as well. So the Eritreans were very brave, very they had a good spirit in fighting their enemies. But at the same time, they also fought against each other, which is not good, which is not the best part of our history.
How did you maintain to be organized as Eritrean students abroad from Eritrea, knowing that you're not in the country? For example, today we have media, we have internet, and we have other communication tools. How did you organize yourselves and communicate with the rest of the world? Because it was a huge movement.
Yeah, that's a very important question, and I think one of the reasons why we organized ourselves was we have this spirit of struggle. We had an ambition to make Eritrea free from the occupying power. We had this strong bond in relation with our people and the struggle of our people. And the ALF was so aware of organizing people. For example, by that time, ALF organized students, they organized workers who were working outside Eritrea in Middle East countries, in Europe,
so it was worldwide.
in Sudan, and even we had a very strong and very overwhelming women organization by that time. So the ALF was aware of this kind of movement. Organizing people was part and parcel of their policy and of their understanding of struggle for the liberation of Eritrea and freeing the Eritrean people from the bondage of colonization and the oppression of the Ethiopian army that existed in our country and was killing people, innocent people without any mercy. Or it was a tough time, but the Eritreans were also tough against their enemies and were fighting fiercely and bravely, and we achieved a lot of, I think, many of the fight was done by that time, was played a vital role in freeing Eritrea from the Ethiopian army.
Yes. So if we can go back to your personal background and your personal history, tell us, how was it to be born and grow up in Eritrea, and what do you remember about Eritrea as a country?
I think one of the nice things that I do remember was, despite the fact that Eritrea was facing a very bad fate, being under the oppression of the Ethiopians by that time, and the killings were going on, and the Eritreans were fighting. And once, for example, when you fight, when the ELF were fighting against the Ethiopian people and kill and wound some of the Ethiopian army forces, they were taking revenge from the civilians by that time, and they were burning villages, they were killing civilians, even children and pregnant women, just to terrorize the Eritrean people and to make them desperate and drop the thought of revolting and rebellion against the Ethiopian existence, against the Ethiopian occupation. And this was also somehow practiced in other areas, in Vietnam and in Palestine, and it was a system, it was systematic killing to terrorize people in the 70s. And all these movements in these countries, like the fight in Vietnam, the fight in Palestine, the fight in Eritrea, the fight in Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, in Africa, and in Asia, in Latin America, like Che Guevara in Cuba, that was somehow leftist movements, left-oriented movements that who were fighting against, by that time, what we call imperialism, of the American imperialism. And America was also supporting the regimes that were oppressing these peoples in different parts of the world, in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. And one of them was my country, Eritrea. In the 60s and 70s, the Ethiopian regime was receiving a lot of military and equipment and technicians and airplanes and bombs and napalm bombs from the United States and Israel. They were supported by, the Ethiopians were supported by the West in general, and particularly by the US. And at that time, as a kid, I cannot say that I was not happy in living in my own country under the patronage of my own parents. And I was as all children, happy and going to school in the morning and coming back in the evening. And you know, one evening when I studied actually in Keren in a Catholic mission school called St. Joseph, and it's a brothers' school. This Catholic school, I had a brother. They call them brothers. They dress like the priests, but they're brothers. They're not fathers, and they are more engaged in social works like teaching and treating people. This is a Catholic tradition, And in this Catholic school, I had a brother called Brother Joseph, or Joseph in Tigrinya, and he was my teacher, and we agreed, me and my teacher, to teach him Arabic, and he will teach me Italian. And I had a lesson in Italian that evening that I will live in the next few days Eritrea. And when I was teaching him Arabic, a mine very near to my home exploded, and the Ethiopian army started gathering the people of that area in order to force them to tell them who did that job, who buried the mine that exploded in their car. No one was killed from the Ethiopian army, but still they were so furious, and they were so angry, and they were so somehow very scared, because it's in the middle of the town that the mine exploded, and they gathered us, and I was in the school, and I was in the second floor, and I was watching, and the explosion was in my area in the town, and I said to my teacher, I have to leave, I have to go to my home. And it was like 6 o'clock, and it was so the situation was there was so tension at that time, and there was war also in some parts of the country, and I rushed to my home in order to see what happened. And I was taken with my mother, 2 of my sisters, my father, my brother, and we were gathered to a place, and we were destined to be killed by the Ethiopian army. And I remember very well, there were 2 Ethiopian officers. One of them was civilian, and the other was military. By that time, the military took power in Ethiopia in 1975. 1974, they took the power, and this incident was in 1975. And the civilian was telling him, these are innocent people, they're civilians. We can't kill them. And the military was insisting that if they don't show us who did that job, we're going to kill them all. And we're hearing their conversation. It was not so far from us. And I understand, of course, Amharic, and I was following the conversation, and the civilian was insisting. He was higher in rank than the military, but the regime, the system was military. That's why the military had a say, had a word instead of the civilian administrator. And at the end of the day, anyway, it was like 7. It was becoming dark, and the civilian could anyhow convince this guy that they will gather these people tomorrow morning and make more interrogation in order to pick the one who did this to the Ethiopian. But we cannot kill like 200, 300 people were gathered at that place. And this was the day that some members of my family decided to leave the country. And I was one of them, with 2 sisters of mine who were older than me. We left Eritrea to the Sudan, and then the other brothers and sisters came after us. So this is how we were deported, how we were expelled from our country in 1975. And it was very hard, it was very harsh. When we came to Sudan, we were refugees. We did not have any rights. No one respected us. They were like sometimes treating us like being not even second class citizens. Refugees are refugee all over the world, but anyway, there are, in some countries you have this legal protection that we didn't have in the Sudan by that time. And still now, in Africa, many of our refugees who flee the country to neighboring countries like Ethiopia or Sudan, they don't have the same respect, the same human dignity,
human rights.
the same human rights that we have here in Europe because of this legal system that we have here in Europe.
And the condition of our countries.
Yes.
So have you been back to Eritrea since that day?
Yes, I went to Eritrea actually when Eritrea was free in 1991, and that was after 17 years. I went back to my home country, Keren, and I went back to Asmara. By that time, there was no, from my own family, there were some relatives, but from my own family, there was no one in Eritrea. But my uncle was living in Asmara. We normally have our home in Keren, we as a family, but I have an uncle who lived in Asmara, and I visited my uncle, and he was sick and old, and I was so devastated. And when I first came to Asmara, Asmara was like very nice city for me when I was young and visiting Asmara from Keren. But by the time when Eritrea was free, Asmara was, fortunately, it was not destroyed by the war, the city, but it was so dirty, and many things were
not as
in
you
a
expected.
in a very shabby situation. And when I came to Asmara, it was not the town or the city that I knew 17, 18, 20 years ago. So it was a shock for me, and it was somehow a relief that I went back to my home country. And I went in 1993 to my home country, and I was very active by that time at the referendum process. But after 1993, I started giving up the hope for Eritrea to be a democratic state, and I could very easily see already by 1994 or 1995 that the country was heading to a wrong direction, and a dictatorship is created in my home country, and that's what we see today as a result.
I'm sorry, we don't have that much time left, but a final question for you. We've talked about your background, we've talked about a little bit of your heritage. Why do you think it's so important for us youths, especially diaspora children, to know about our heritage and to know about our historical background, to recognize the problem today and the current situation in Eritrea?
Well, very nice question, but very long to answer. Anyway, I think you are the future of Eritrea. Whether you are born here and grown up here or inside the country, the youth is the future, and I believe that the youth can play a very vital role in developing the country. And the chance that you get as diaspora young people, the youth of diaspora, the second generation, my sons and you and the others, you have a role to play in the coming future of the country if the country be democratic state, and the rights of human being will be respected in the country. And I think in this respect, we are very weak as Eritreans in organizing ourselves in this country in order to give the cultural heritage that we had in our baggage when we came to this country, like me and the others. I think we have to transform this to our children and to the second generation, teach them and tell them and raise their awareness of the history of Eritrea, the struggle that was going on for 30 years, even the struggle against the dictatorship now is almost like 25 years now. All these the youth should be involved in some way or another in democratizing Eritrea and giving hope for the Eritrean people. And I think many of the Eritreans are waiting for these diaspora Eritreans to come and help them to develop their life in education, health, infrastructure in general, sanitation, and many things that should be developed in our country, because after the war everything was destroyed, and I think during the dictatorship regime in Eritrea, many of the things went wrong, and many of the infrastructure is totally destroyed, and we need all the potential capacities that exist among Eritreans to develop the country and make it better for the population who live there, and for us even as Eritreans, to be proud of our country.
Thank you, Zain Shukran. Jazakallah khair for that. And thank you guys for watching today, and we will be back, inshallah.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you.